A pardoning, decades in the making. The story of Lena Baker, the only woman put to death by an electric chair in the state of Georgia, is still being set straight in the small town of Cuthbert.
March 5, 1945, Georgia State Prison, Reedsville, Georgia. A 44-year-old black woman was strapped into an electric chair. Her hands were steady, her voice did not shake, and before the state of Georgia ended her life, she looked at the witnesses in that room and said, "What I did in self-defense, or I would have been killed myself. God has forgiven me. I have nothing against anyone. I am ready to go." Then she was gone. Her name was Lena Baker. She was not a hired killer. She was not a woman who plotted anyone's death. She was a poor black woman from a small Georgia town who fought back against a man who had beaten her, imprisoned her, and threatened to kill her, and the state executed her for it. After her death, there was no funeral, no public mourning. She was buried in an unmarked grave behind a church where she once sang in the choir, and the world moved on without her. For over 50 years, nobody raised a fuss, but court records tell a different story. A story about what really happened inside that isolated mill house. A story a jury heard in less than 6 hours and chose to ignore. 60 years later, the state of Georgia would be forced to admit that executing Lena Baker was a grievous error. But here is the question nobody asked in 1945. Who was truly on trial? Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because we cover the cases history tried to bury, and today, we are telling Lena Baker's story exactly the way it should have been told in 1945. To understand what happened on that Sunday morning in April 1944, you first need to understand the world Lena Baker was born into. Lena Baker came into this world on June 8, 1900, just outside Cuthbert, a small rural town in Randolph County, Georgia. This was the Jim Crow South, a place where black lives carried very little legal protection and even less opportunity. Her mother, Queen Harris, was the daughter of enslaved people. That means poverty was not something that just happened to Lena. It was passed down to her before she ever took her first breath. She made it through the 6th grade. She could read, she could write. In her community, at that time, that actually meant something. But formal education ended there, because for a poor black girl in rural Georgia, the system was never built to take her further. She washed other people's clothes, she picked cotton under the Georgia sun, she cleaned houses for white families, the only work that was consistently available to black women in that part of the state. Eventually, she had 3 children and lived with her mother in a small shack on the outskirts of Cuthbert. When the wages ran out, and they always did, Lena made desperate choices. She and a friend ran what court records describe as a lewd house, entertaining men for money. In 1920, she was convicted of prostitution and spent several months in jail. That was not a character flaw. That was a woman with no safety net doing what she had to do to survive in a country that had never given her a fair shot. She also sang in the choir at Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church. Remember that detail. Then, in the early 1940s, Knight's son hired her to care for his aging, injured father. Lena Baker thought her luck had finally changed. She was wrong. Now, let's talk about the man on the other side of this story. Ernest B. Knight was approximately 65 to 67 years old at the time of these events. He was a white grist mill operator in Cuthbert, Randolph County, a landowner, a churchgoer, and a man with standing in a small, tight-knit community where standing meant protection. In a town like Cuthbert in the 1940s, a man like Knight did not have to answer for much. His son proved that. He physically beat Lena Baker so severely she nearly lost her life and faced 0 legal consequences for it. That tells you everything you need to know about how the Knight family operated and what they believed they could do without punishment. When Lena was hired to care for the elder Knight, a sexual relationship began almost immediately. Court records confirm it was not something Lena entered willingly. Knight used alcohol as a tool. He regularly supplied Lena with liquor during their time together, keeping her in a vulnerable state while he maintained full control of the situation. He also held her against her will. On multiple occasions, he kept her at his mill house, an isolated location he controlled completely, far from her 3 children. He occasionally gave her small amounts of money, just enough to muddy the waters, just enough for a 1944 jury to call it something other than what it was. Court records show that what Knight was doing to Lena Baker had a name, even if that name would not be spoken in a Georgia courtroom for decades. And on the morning of April 30th, 1944, Ernest B. Knight went to church. Things did not stay quiet for long. The relationship between Lena and Ernest Knight became known around Cuthbert, a poor black woman, a wealthy white man. In 1944 Georgia, that kind of talk did not go unanswered. Knight's son moved first. He tracked Lena down and beat her so badly she nearly died. Not to protect her, not out of concern for her well-being. He did it to protect his father's name and his family's reputation in that community. After that beating, Lena was terrified. Court records carry her own words. She testified that she was afraid to see Ernest Knight again after what his son had done to her. But her fear did not matter to Knight. He showed up at her door anyway. He did not ask. He demanded she come with him to the mill house, the same isolated place where he had already held her against her will before. Lena asked if he had any liquor. He had home brew. She told him she preferred whiskey. He reached into his pocket, handed her 50 cents, and told her to meet him there later, as if this were a normal arrangement, as if they were two people making a free choice. They were not. This pattern had been going on for months. Knight demanding, Lena complying under pressure. Small amounts of money exchanged to make coercion look like something else entirely. No one in Cuthbert stepped in. No authority intervened. Lena had no one to report this to, and no reason to believe anyone would have listened even if she had. What happened when Lena arrived at that mill house on the night of April 29th is something the jury heard and chose to ignore. Here is where this case is different from almost every other true crime story you will hear. There were no accomplices, no paid hitmen, no secret meetings, no coordinated plan. Court records show zero evidence of premeditation on Lena Baker's part. She did not source a weapon in advance. She did not recruit anyone. She did not plot Ernest Knight's death. What existed instead was a woman with no legal recourse, no advocate, and no way out. If there was any planning in this case, and there was, it belonged entirely to Ernest Knight. He planned to attend church on the morning of April 30th, 1944, and before he left, he planned to lock Lena Baker inside his mill house. He took the key. He took her freedom with it. When he returned, he brought dinner and a half pint of whiskey. That was not kindness. That was the same pattern he had been running for months. Keep her confined, keep her compliant, keep her from leaving. People in Cuthbert knew what Knight had over Lena, and not one of them came forward at trial to speak on her behalf. Her court-appointed attorney called 0 defense witnesses. 0. That decision, or rather that failure, would cost Lena Baker her life. If you are watching this, and you are as disturbed as I am right now, hit that like button and help this story reach more people. Lena Baker's name deserves to be known. Now let's get into what really happened inside that mill house. Saturday, April 29th, 1944, afternoon. Ernest Knight showed up at Lena Baker's door. He did not come to ask. He came to demand. He wanted her at the mill house. Court records confirm that Lena told him she was afraid to go. Those were her exact words. She was afraid to go to the mill. Knight had only homebrew at the mill house. Lena told him she preferred whiskey. He pulled out 50 cents, handed it to her, and told her to get some and meet him there later. She went. Saturday evening. Lena arrived at the mill house. They drank the whiskey together. Then Lena asked to go home. She had children waiting for her. Court records document that she asked more than once. She was not being difficult. She was being a mother who wanted to get back to her kids. Knight's answer, according to her testimony, was this: "Do what I tell you to do, or I'll kill you." She stayed. She had no real choice. Sunday morning, April 30th, 1944. Ernest Knight got up and went to church. Before he walked out the door, he locked Lena Baker inside the mill house. He took the key with him. She was alone, confined, no key, no freedom. No one in Cuthbert who knew exactly where she was. Sunday afternoon, Knight returned. He brought dinner and a half pint of whiskey. Lena asked again to leave. She wanted to go home to her children. Knight reached for his pistol. What followed was a physical struggle. The two of them fought over the gun. Lena, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 135 pounds, wrestled the pistol away from him. Knight moved toward the door. According to Lena's testimony, he reached for an iron bar as he moved. She fired once. The bullet struck Knight in the head, behind his left ear. Ernest B. Knight died inside his own mill house. Lena walked out. There was no plan, no escape route, no celebration. Just a woman who would later tell the court, "I believe he would have killed me if I had not done what I did." There were no witnesses inside that mill house, no emergency services to call, just Lena Baker and the decision she made to stay alive. At trial, prosecutors presented one key argument. Witnesses testified that no iron bar was found at the scene. That single detail was all the jury needed, and they used it to send her to the electric chair. Lena Baker was arrested shortly after Ernest Knight's death. There was no prolonged manhunt, no deep investigation into what had actually been happening inside that mill house for months. No one sat down and asked Lena Baker what Knight had done to her. No one documented the abuse. No one reviewed the pattern of confinement, threats, and forced stays that court records would later reveal. The narrative was fixed within hours. A black woman had killed a white man. In Cuthbert, Georgia, in 1944, that was the only part of the story that mattered. Knight's family faced no legal scrutiny, not even his son, the same man who had beaten Lena so severely she nearly died. He was never questioned, never charged, never held accountable for anything. Lena had no financial motive. There was no insurance policy, no inheritance, no gain of any kind. She walked out of that mill house with nothing except her life, which she believed Knight had been about to take. Her 3 children and her mother were left behind. No record exists of anyone checking on them. No formal acknowledgement of their loss was ever made. And when the local press covered the story, they did not use her name at first. They called her a 40-year-old Cuthbert Negro woman. Not a mother, not a person, just a description, just a case. What followed Lena Baker's arrest was not an investigation. It was a formality. No one conducted an extended forensic review of the mill house. No one made a serious effort to corroborate Lena's account of the months of abuse that had led to that Sunday afternoon. No investigator documented the injuries she had suffered at the hands of Knight's son. No one went looking for witnesses to Knight's pattern of locking her inside that isolated building against her will. The prosecution built its entire case on a single point. No iron bar was recovered at the mill house scene. That one absence was enough. It allowed them to reframe everything. Suddenly, Lena's act of self-defense became cold-blooded murder. Suddenly, Ernest Knight was a man simply trying to escape when she shot him. That was the story they chose, and nobody in authority challenged it. Lena, for her part, never changed her account, not once. From the moment of her arrest straight through to trial, her story remained consistent. She did not flee Randolph County. She did not attempt to hide what had happened. She offered no contradictory statements. In any fair system, that consistency would count for something. It counted for nothing here. Her case was handed to a court-appointed attorney. Court records confirm he called not a single witness on her behalf. From the day of her arrest to the start of her trial was approximately 3.5 months. 3.5 months to prepare a defense in a capital murder case. It was never enough. In 1944, there was no breakthrough. No lawyer stood up and fought back. No appeal succeeded. No authority figure looked at the court record and said, "This is wrong." The state of Georgia executed Lena Baker, buried her without a church service, and moved on. The wrong person had been treated as the criminal, and for decades, nobody in power did anything about it. The first crack in that silence came in 1998, more than 50 years after her death. Members of Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church, the same church where Lena had once sung in the choir, placed a headstone on her unmarked grave. It was a simple stone, but it was the first public act of remembrance she had ever received. Then, in 2001, author Layla Bond Phillips published The Lena Baker Story, putting the court records, Lena's own testimony, and the full weight of what happened in 1944 in front of readers for the first time at scale. In 2005, playwright Janice Liddell read through the entire trial transcript and debuted Who Will Sing for Lena, a one-woman play that gave Lena's voice back to her after 60 years of silence. Around that same time, civil rights activist John Cole Vodica and Lena's great-nephew Roosevelt Curry began formally petitioning the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles. Their argument was simple. The court record itself proved Lena Baker was the victim. The execution had been the real crime. And 60 years later, Georgia was finally being asked to admit it. August 14, 1944, Randolph County Superior Court, Cuthbert, Georgia. Lena Baker went on trial for her life. The judge presiding over her case was Charles William Worrell, known around the courthouse as Two-Gun Worrell. He earned that name by keeping 2 pistols visibly displayed on his bench and openly boasting about personal gunfights. This was the man chosen to oversee a capital murder trial. He would later be appointed to the Georgia Supreme Court. The jury was made up of 12 white men, all white, all male. Many of them shared the same churches, the same social circles, and the same deeply held racial assumptions about black women in the Jim Crow South. The trial lasted less than a single day. Some accounts place the total testimony at approximately 4 hours. Lena's court-appointed attorney called no witnesses, not one. The only defense the jury heard was Lena's own unsworn statement, meaning it carried less legal weight than sworn testimony and could not be properly tested in cross-examination. In that statement, she described the beatings, the forced confinements, the death threat, the struggle over the gun, and the iron bar Knight reached for before she fired. The prosecution's entire rebuttal came down to 4 words. No iron bar found. That was enough. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Their verdict was guilty, and they offered no recommendation of mercy. Under Georgia law at the time, that absence was not a technicality. It was a death sentence. Mandatory, automatic. Judge Worrell sentenced Lena Baker to die in Georgia's electric chair, a machine the state called Old Sparky. Governor Ellis Arnall granted a 60-day reprieve, giving the Board of Pardons and Paroles time to review the case. In January 1945, the board denied clemency. No explanation, no mercy, no second look. Decades later, Cuthbert District Attorney Charles Ferguson stated plainly that this case would not meet the requirements for capital punishment today, and likely would not have been charged as murder at all. February 23, 1945, Lena Baker arrived at Reidsville State Prison, the home of Old Sparky. That same day, a mugshot was taken. It is the only known photograph of her that exists. In it, she wears a scarf tied beneath her chin. Her head is tilted slightly to the left. A glare from the camera light falls across her face, obscuring her eyes. Affixed to her chest is a number, 11,279. She was no longer Lena Baker to the state of Georgia. She was a number. There was no dedicated women's wing at Reidsville. She was placed in the men's section of the prison and moved to a solitary cell near the execution chamber only days before her death. She was not the first person to sit in that chair. Between 1924 and 1980, Old Sparky put 418 people to death in Georgia. Of the 441 people executed by electric chair through 2001, 83% were black. Lena Baker already knew what that machine was built for. She had spent her entire life living inside the system that built it. March 5, 1945. Witnesses in that room described her as calm, composed, unbowed by what was about to happen. She delivered her final statement without wavering. What I'd done, I did in self-defense, or I would have been killed myself. Where I was, I could not overcome it. God has forgiven me. I have nothing against anyone. I am ready to go. I am ready to meet my God. It took 6 minutes for her to die. Afterward, she was buried behind Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church, the same church where she had once lifted her voice in the choir, in an unmarked grave. No funeral service, no farewell. As John Kolvadicka said years later, they put her in jail, prosecuted her, killed her, and she was forgotten about. She was 44 years old. 1998. 53 years after Lena Baker was buried behind Mount Vernon Missionary Baptist Church without a funeral, without a marker, without a single word spoken over her grave, members of that same church placed a headstone where she lay. It was the first time anyone had publicly said, "She was here, she mattered." Then, in 2005, The Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles issued Lena Baker a full and unconditional posthumous pardon. They stated that the refusal to grant her clemency in 1945 was a grievous error, as this case called out for mercy. It was only the third posthumous pardon in the agency's 62-year history. Her great-great-nephew Charles McKelveen said it clearly. This was not a white or black issue. It was an issue of right or wrong. And John Cole Vodica did not let the pardon close the conversation. There are still a lot of racial overtones in what goes on in the legal system today. We still have a system that is not foolproof, where racism still plays a part. Lena's 3 children grew up without their mother. No record documents how they were told. No record exists of who held them that night. She was a woman who only ever asked to go home to her children, and was executed for fighting to survive. Georgia admitted it was a grievous error, but Lena Baker already knew that. She said so herself, in her last 6 minutes on Earth. I want to know, which moment in Lena's story hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments below. And if you believe her story deserves to be heard, share this video, because for too long, nobody did. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a case. We will see you in the next one.